Panel, during the break, we were rethinking some things, I think, about what a scenario where it might not just be a complete walk away for President Obama in Florida. Mary Ellen, start us off. How could Florida still be competitive for Romney so that he might even win?
You know, I think that is a very likely scenario. First of all, we've got Obama's base lacks just as much enthusiasm as a lot of the Romney base does. I also think that there is the likelihood that, you know, depending on who Romney does pick as a running mate, I mean, certainly if he picked Marco Rubio, that would encourage more people to join him and get more excited in Florida, but it also, I think, would help him with the Hispanic vote nationwide. Then there is the prospect that the Obamacare decision could come out of the Supreme Court and and if it's a win for the opponents, which people seem to think is likely to happen, then that's another thing that will re-energize them, say, look, we got this, now we got to bring Romney in to fix it, you know? So I think it's not the end of the road here.
I think that is true. That's true. But I think something interesting that we talked about earlier is we could face the prospect this year for the first time since I've been in Florida that Florida might not matter all that much in the presidential race. Yeah, I know. Because
what are we doing here?
You know, the economy is starting to improve in a couple of key upper Midwest states where, you know, there are a lot of union voters and they're not particularly fond of Romney. And, you know, I think if you look at a possibility that if Obama wins Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, which is his home state, and of course throw in the traditional New York and California, the Democratic states, it's possible that Obama could win re-election even if he loses Florida. That's a really unusual thing to say. I mean, usually it's Florida, Florida, Florida.
Okay, let's move away from the presidential election for a moment. Let's just talk about our governor for a second. How's he doing in terms of his own popularity? His race is coming up 2.5 years from now. Steve, let me throw that to you.
He's doing better,
okay.
But I would say it's baby steps. It's marginal. He made the shrewd move of going into the legislature with a much narrower agenda this year than in his first year. He really had 3 things he wanted to get, and he got them very quickly. He got $1 billion more for public education, which we know is not really $1 billion net. It's making up for past shortfalls, or trying to. A package of incentives to try to attract more jobs and more businesses to the state, and an attempt again to reform and eliminate the fraud in our car insurance system in Florida. Barely passed. What he also got, though, he got some things from the legislature that he didn't want. Higher tuition for college kids, which he may not be able to veto because of the way they put it in the budget. A proposal for a spin-off of a new state university in Lakeland for polytechnic education. And the budget is filled with all of these hometown projects in an election year that he's probably going to have to veto, and it'll leave some scar tissue with his fellow Republicans in the Capitol.
Brent, who's lining up to run against him, Republican or Democrat?
Well, you know, it's funny, we have that conversation, seems like every day, and for years we've had the conversation about the Democratic Party's bench strength, or lack thereof. And as far as the Republican side goes, I don't know who's going to stick their neck out necessarily against this guy who came from nowhere, spent $70 million of his own money, and took care of the established field. I guess the other thing is I'm not sure how willing Governor Scott would be to make that kind of an investment in a second term either. But at this point, I've heard no Republican names. You know, there's speculation, obviously. Down the road, it's hard to imagine that CFO Atwater and the Agriculture Commissioner Putnam won't want to probably seek that office.
But there is some speculation about that.
Well, for 2014, I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
But you know,
down the road,
yeah,
beyond that.
Are you gonna challenge the incumbent in your own party? And then they're talking about what happens if you lose. For instance, if Marco Rubio gets on the ticket, it's like, well, what happens? They're gone. You know, if they lose. And the Democratic side, you do hear that Alex Sink wants to get another shot at this thing, and that's really the only name I've heard out there in terms of the Democratic side. At this point, My colleagues may very well have.
It's interesting that you would think with that, 30 approval rating of the governor below 40%, that there would be more people saying, hey, maybe this is doable. As far as spending his own money, again, he may not have to. The Let's Get to Work, which was his fundraising organization, is already starting to really raise a lot of money. So he's not going to have to spend his own money.
Almost near $1 million, right?
Yeah, they're raising money this time around from contributors, and it's going well for him, which might be, maybe that's scaring people away. I don't know.
Any other comments?
Well, we're still a Republican state in statewide elections for the most part. Republicans are much stronger. What we're talking about here is the Democrats are just bereft of candidates, and it's they've probably got another year to find somebody really credible.
Well,
maybe.
it's a pretty sad situation when you hear that the Democrats, are actually talking about having Charlie Crist be the one that challenges Rick Scott as a Democrat. I mean, that is
their best hope.
That is where, that's a sad sign. So.
Well, let's move on to the race for the United States Senate. We've got incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson squaring off against either United States Congressman Connie Mack or former United States Senator George Lemieux. Seems like the incumbent is building quite a lead right now over both of them, and he's the odds-on favorite. Would people agree with that statement? David, I'll throw it to you.
I was refusing to make eye contact with you because I don't want to answer this question. This race is boring to me, and I can't figure out.
Make up something.
How can it be,
Bill,
David?
It's nobody's paying attention.
Right,
Nobody
no.
will pay attention. It's going to get nasty. We all know in October, and that's.
But won't it get drowned out by the presidential ads and the ads for all these other races?
It'll still be boring, but it'll get very nasty.
Bill Nelson's fate, I guess, rides on the sort of the fate of President Obama.
That race enough will be close enough in Florida. I think that helps him. Don't
Yeah,
you,
and
David?
I think if nationally Democrats do well, then Bill Nelson is reelected. The strongest candidate in the Republican field appears to be Connie Mack right now. He's certainly the one getting all the press and doing well in the polls as soon as he got in. He's got immediate name recognition from his father's time in the United States Senate. And so if I wouldn't count out George Lemieux, but if you're looking at a Connie Mack, Bill Nelson race, I think
A lot of baggage there in the Republican side.
well, that's
David,
true too. But I
I
think it really depends on how things go nationally.
Nelson's a good retail politician.
Sure
He
is.
really is. He's really underestimated. He's good at that, especially in North Florida. And the guy's led a charmed life. He's had, look who he's had as his opponents. Well, he had Bill McCollum in 2000, which was the year, of course, of the Bush-Gore recount election here in the state, 500 votes. And he had Katherine Harris as his opponent last time. She was not a strong candidate. And this time it looks like he's going to have Connie Mack the fourth. So.
Well, on the Republican side, it's beginning to heat up and get a little nasty. They've been hurling insults at one another so far. So it could be that just as in the national race for president, the Republican nominee for that position could wind up wounded as he goes into the race with Senator Nelson. Let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite political stories so far this year. And well, Mary Ellen, let's start with you. What have been one or two of your favorite political stories of this important election year?
Well, for me, it's the story that I find the most fascinating is not a story that was intended to be a political story, and that's the Trayvon Martin case. I think that story has done something that has re-energized and provoked a conversation about race. And it's a conversation that's really important for Florida because it is not only looking at the black-white racial situation we have, but the black-Hispanic one. And while that is, it's got tentacles that will, I think, influence this political year. And it's not it's kind of a grim story to be talking about, but I think it's a super important one.
Does it have enough, for lack of a better term, length of reporting to have a political impact in Florida in 2012?
Whether they sustain the anger and frustration that a lot of African Americans have on this issue, sustain that another 6 months, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But people won't forget about it, and I think that is something that is going to provoke some attention. And it's going to require the candidates to talk about it, and that's a good thing.
Who does it benefit?
Well, it depends on how they answer. I mean, it certainly benefits Obama, I think, because he, people, if they're angry and want to show up because they want to reelect a black president, that may help him. But
Okay, Steve?
Well, to me, it was the Republican Senate infighting during the legislative session, trying to pick the next Senate president or a succession of Senate presidents. They didn't show much responsibility there. Their personal ambitions got in the way of everything else, but it was fun to watch now. Supposedly, they've worked the whole thing out, but there are a lot of Republican Senate seats that are open in 2012, far more than usual because of term limits. And so it looks like we're going to have, for the near future here, all elbows and knees among Republican senators trying to outmuscle each other to get in line to be Senate president. It's all about power.
Is Senator Andy Gardner secure?
Well, at the moment he seems to be. The surprise thing there is a guy that the media and the lobbyists and everybody think is a very astute political guy, John Thrasher, is at the moment the guy who's gotten elbowed out of position here, and that's the interesting thing to see.
Okay, Brent?
Well, I think it's funny, too, that less than 3 weeks after the governor's push for PIP narrowly squeaked through the Senate on the last day of the session, that we've already got health care personnel staffing agencies out there trying to get around the new law. So it'll be interesting to see how, and the governor hasn't signed the bill yet, so.
About 30 seconds left.
In any year after redistricting, I think it's really interesting politically because there's all of these suddenly new opportunities and people moving around, and I'm just kind of interested to see who's going to run for, what congressional seats and what legislative seats and what kind of new blood, redistricting might pump into politics, or whether everybody's just going to move to another district.